The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Cody, Wyoming, as Tessa Harper folded the last of her late husband's shirts into a battered leather trunk, her hands trembling not from grief, but from the terrifying freedom of having absolutely nothing left to lose. It had been 6 months since cholera took William Harper, and 3 weeks since the bank claimed their small ranch on the outskirts of town. The land that William's father had broken and tamed, the home where they had spent 2 short years of marriage before sickness stole him away, now belonged to Eastern speculators who had never felt Wyoming dirt beneath their fingernails. At 22 years old, Tessa found herself alone in a world that had little patience for widows without family or fortune. The boarding house room she had rented with the last of her savings smelled of lye soap and other people's sorrows. A narrow bed, a washstand, and space enough to stack her few belongings. That was all she could afford, and even this would run out by week's end. Her plan, such as it was, involved taking the stage to Cheyenne and finding work as a seamstress or perhaps a cook in one of the hotels there. It was not much of a plan, but it was all she had. Tessa pressed William's shirt to her face one last time, breathing in the fading scent of him, of the life they had built together. 22 felt impossibly young and impossibly old all at once. Young enough that her whole life stretched before her like an unmarked trail. Old enough to know that trails could lead to cliffs and dead ends just as easily as to green valleys. She placed the shirt in the trunk and closed the lid, the brass latches clicking with a finality that made her throat tighten. This was it, then. The last of the packing, the last of her old life. Tomorrow morning, she would board the stage and leave Cody behind, leave the memories of William and their brief happiness, leave everything familiar for the uncertain promise of Cheyenne. A knock at the door made her jump. She wiped her eyes quickly, straightened her black morning dress, and opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house keeper, her round face creased with concern. "Tessa, dear, there is a gentleman downstairs asking for you. Says his name is Dawson Vale." Tessa frowned. The name meant nothing to her. "I do not know anyone by that name. He says he knew your late husband, rode with him on a cattle drive 5 years back." Curiosity overcame Tessa's desire for solitude. She followed Mrs. Patterson down the narrow stairs to the boarding house parlor, where a tall man stood with his hat in his hands, studying the faded wallpaper as if it held secrets. He turned when he heard them enter, and Tessa found herself looking into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, the color of Wyoming sky on a clear autumn day. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice low and respectful, "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Dawson Vale. I own a ranch about 10 miles north of town." He was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. There was a steadiness about him, a quietness that reminded her of deep water. His clothes were clean but worn, the clothes of a working rancher rather than a gentleman farmer. "Mr. Vale," Tessa acknowledged, uncertain what else to say. "I knew your husband. Not well, but we worked together on the Goodnight Drive in '73. He was a good man, and I was sorry to hear of his passing. I have been away for the past 8 months, settling my father's estate in Colorado, or I would have paid my respects sooner." "That is kind of you to say." Dawson shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned you are leaving town tomorrow. News travels fast in a small town. I also heard about the bank taking your ranch. That is a hard thing, losing your home on top of everything else." Tessa lifted her chin, pride stiffening her spine. "I will manage, Mr. Vale. I am not looking for charity." "No, madam, I expect you are not. But I came here today because I have a proposal that might interest you. Not charity, but honest work." Despite herself, Tessa felt a flicker of curiosity. "What kind of work?" "My ranch is doing well. I run about 300 head of cattle, and I have contracts with the Army at Fort Yellowstone. But I need help. My cook quit last month to get married, and I have been trying to manage the household myself alongside the ranch work. It is too much for one person. I need someone who can cook, keep house, and help with the accounts. The pay would be $30 a month plus room and board." $30 a month was more than fair for such work, more than Tessa could hope to make in Cheyenne starting out with no references. But the thought of living on another man's ranch, of being dependent on someone's goodwill, made her hesitate. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Vale, but I could not possibly impose on you in that way. It would not be an imposition. It would be honest work for honest pay. I have a separate cabin on the property that my foreman used to occupy before he moved to his own place last year. You would have your privacy and independence, and if it does not work out, you would have saved enough money to make a proper start somewhere else." The offer was generous, perhaps too generous. Tessa studied his face, looking for any hint of improper intentions, but saw only earnest goodwill. "Why would you do this for me? You said yourself you barely knew my husband." Dawson was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "I lost my wife 2 years ago. Childbirth. The baby died too, so I know something about how it feels to have your whole life pulled out from under you, to have to start over from nothing. I am not offering you charity, Mrs. Harper. I am offering you a chance, the kind of chance I wish someone had offered me when I was at my lowest." The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in Tessa's chest. She saw the grief in his eyes, the same grief she carried, and recognized a kindred spirit. "I would need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course. I will be staying at the hotel tonight. If you decide you are interested, meet me at the general store tomorrow morning at 8. If not, I wish you the best of luck in Cheyenne." He settled his hat on his head, nodded to her and Mrs. Patterson, and left. Tessa stood in the parlor long after the door closed behind him, her mind churning. "Dawson Vale is a good man," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Lost his wife Mary about 2 years back, just like he said. Took it hard but kept working. He does not drink, does not gamble, goes to church regular when weather permits. If he is offering you honest work, you could do a lot worse." Tessa returned to her room and sat on the narrow bed, staring at her pack trunk. The sensible thing would be to accept his offer. It was good pay, honest work, and it would keep her in Cody, where at least she knew the town and some of the people. But something about the offer unsettled her, though she could not put her finger on what. Perhaps it was the kindness in Dawson Vale's eyes, the genuine concern. She had grown accustomed to people's pity over the past months, but his offer felt different. He had looked at her not as a pitiable widow, but as a person capable of work and worthy of fair wages. That kind of respect was rare, especially for a woman in her position. She thought of William, of what he would want for her. He had always said she was stronger than she knew, that she could do anything she set her mind to. Would he want her to run off to Cheyenne alone, or would he want her to take this opportunity? Sleep came slowly that night. Tessa lay awake listening to the sounds of the boarding house, the creaking floorboards, the distant sound of someone coughing. She thought about her 2 years with William, the happiness they had shared despite the hard work and uncertain future. She thought about the ranch they had built together, now in the hands of strangers. She thought about starting over, about the terrifying blank page of her future. By the time dawn light crept through her window, she had made her decision. At 10 minutes before 8, Tessa stood outside the general store with her trunk and carpetbag at her feet. The morning was cool, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Cody was waking up around her, shopkeepers opening their doors, horses being hitched to posts, the normal rhythms of a small town beginning another day. Dawson Vale appeared at exactly 8 o'clock, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 chestnut horses. He climbed down when he saw her, and something like relief crossed his face. "Mrs. Harper, I am glad to see you." "I have conditions," Tessa said before she could lose her nerve. "I want a written contract stating my wages and duties. I want 1 day off per week. And if either of us is not satisfied with the arrangement after 3 months, either party can end it with 2 weeks' notice." Dawson's mouth curved into the first real smile she had seen from him. "That seems more than fair. I can have a contract drawn up by the end of the week." "Will your word and mine do until then?" "Yes." He helped her load her belongings into the wagon, his movements efficient and respectful. He handed her up onto the seat beside him with the same careful courtesy, as if she were something precious rather than a desperate widow with nowhere else to go. The ride north out of Cody took them through rolling grassland, golden in the late summer sun. The Shoshone River glinted in the distance, and beyond it, the Absaroka Mountains rose up purple and imposing against the sky. It was beautiful country, wild and open in a way that still took Tessa's breath away even after 3 years in Wyoming. "Your ranch is this far from town?" she asked. "It is a bit isolated," Dawson admitted, "but the land is good and the water is reliable. I run the cattle up into the high country in summer and bring them down before the snows come. It is a good operation, just too much for one person to manage alone." "Do you have any hands working for you?" "2 regular hands, Jake and Samuel. They are both good men. Jake is married and lives in town. Samuel has a cabin on the property, but he keeps to himself mostly. There is also Tommy, who comes up from town 3 days a week to help with the horses. He is only 17 but a hard worker." They rode in companionable silence for a while. Tessa found herself stealing glances at Dawson's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with casual competence. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, but it was more than that. There was a calmness about him, a sense of being comfortable in his own skin that she found oddly reassuring. "You can ask me," Dawson said suddenly. "Whatever questions you have. I imagine you must have some, accepting a job from a stranger." Tessa felt her cheeks heat slightly. "I was wondering why you have not remarried. 2 years is long enough that people would not talk, and a rancher needs a wife. I have not found anyone I want to marry, and I am not sure I want to try again, to be honest. Losing Mary nearly broke me. I am not eager to risk that kind of pain again." His honesty was disarming. "I understand. I feel the same way about William. Everyone says time heals all wounds, but some wounds leave scars that never quite fade. That is the truth of it." They crested a rise and Dawson pointed ahead. "There, that is home." The ranch spread out before them in a valley between 2 ridges. A good-sized house stood at the center, built of logs and stone with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. Nearby were a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and 2 smaller cabins. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, grazing peacefully. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, lined with cottonwood trees that were just beginning to turn gold. "It is beautiful," Tessa said, and meant it. "Thank you. My father and I built the main house 10 years ago before he passed. I have been adding to it bit by bit." As they drew closer, Tessa could see the care that had gone into the place. The fences were well maintained, the buildings in good repair. This was not some struggling outfit barely holding on, but a working ranch built on solid foundations. A man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, tall and lanky with a weathered face and graying hair. "So you found yourself a cook, boss. Mrs. Harper, this is Samuel. Samuel, Mrs. Tessa Harper." She will be keeping house and cooking for us." Samuel touched his hat brim. "Pleased to meet you, madam. I will say straight out that I am mighty glad you are here. Dawson's cooking has been testing my constitution something fierce." Despite herself, Tessa laughed. "I promise to do better than that." Dawson helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk to the smaller of the two cabins. Inside was a single room, simply furnished but clean. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a small stove in the corner, a table and two chairs by the window. There was even a rag rug on the floor and curtains at the window, clearly put there in preparation for her arrival. "It is not much," Dawson said, setting her trunk down. "But it is private and the stove draws well. If you need anything else, you just have to ask. It is perfect, thank you." He showed her the main house next, a rambling structure that was clearly built for a family. The main room held a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books. The kitchen was spacious with a good stove and a pump for water right at the sink, a luxury Tessa had not had at her own ranch. "I usually eat breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, and supper around 7, Dawson explained. "Samuel and the others eat in the bunkhouse mostly, but they come up to the main house for Sunday dinner. I keep chickens for eggs, and there is a smokehouse with bacon and ham. The root cellar is well stocked, and we can get anything else you need from town." They worked out the details of her duties over the next hour. Cooking, cleaning, laundry once a week, and helping Dawson with his account books on Friday afternoons. It was a full schedule but not unreasonable, and the idea of having steady work and a place to live eased something tight in Tessa's chest. She started that very afternoon, preparing a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and fried ham. It felt strange to be cooking in someone else's kitchen, but the work was familiar and comforting. Dawson and Samuel came in at noon dusty and tired, and the look of pure gratitude on their faces when they saw the food laid out was almost comical. "Mrs. Harper, this looks like a feast," Samuel said, washing his hands at the sink. "It is just beans and cornbread." After weeks of Dawson's attempts at cooking, beans and cornbread is a feast. They ate together at the big table, and Tessa found herself relaxing into the easy conversation. Samuel told stories about his years working on ranches across Wyoming and Montana, and Dawson added his own observations with dry humor that made Tessa smile despite herself. The work fell into a rhythm over the following days. Tessa rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, cleaned the house while the men were out working, and had dinner ready when they came in at noon. Afternoons she spent on laundry, mending, and preparing supper. It was hard work but satisfying, and she fell into bed each night tired enough that the grief and loneliness had less time to catch up with her. Dawson was an easy man to work for. He was quiet but not unkind, and he treated her with unfailing respect. He never presumed on their arrangement, never made her feel like anything other than a valued employee. When they worked on the accounts together on Friday afternoons, she discovered he had a good head for business and a careful approach to managing his finances. "You are quite good at this," Tessa said, reviewing his ledgers. "Everything is meticulous. I learned the hard way that sloppy bookkeeping leads to disaster. My father nearly lost the ranch one year because he had not kept track of his debts. I swore I would never make the same mistake." The first Sunday, Jake arrived with his wife Clara for dinner. Clara was a friendly woman in her 30s who welcomed Tessa warmly and immediately began sharing all the local gossip. "I am so glad Dawson finally found someone to help him," Clara said as she helped Tessa dish up the roast chicken. "We have all been worried about him, working himself to the bone out here alone. He seems to manage well enough. He manages because he has to, but it is not good for a person to be so isolated. He barely comes into town anymore except for supplies and church." After dinner, Clara pulled Tessa aside. "I hope you do not mind me saying, but you are good for this place. There has not been a woman's touch here since Mary died, and it shows. The house feels like a home again." Tessa was not sure what to make of that. She was just the hired help, not the lady of the house. But she could not deny that she felt more settled here than she had expected. The work was hard but purposeful, and there was something comforting about the routine of ranch life. Weeks slipped into a month, and then 6 weeks. Autumn came on in earnest, the aspens turning gold and the nights growing crisp and cold. Dawson and Samuel brought the cattle down from the high pastures, and the ranch bustled with activity as they sorted and counted the herd, identifying which animals would be sold and which kept for breeding. Tessa found herself watching Dawson more than she should. The way he moved with quiet confidence, the way he gentled a nervous horse with soft words and patient hands, the way he smiled when he thought no one was looking. It was a kind smile, tinged with sadness but genuine. She told herself it was just gratitude, that she was simply appreciative of his kindness in giving her work when she needed it. But late at night in her cabin, alone with her thoughts, she could not quite convince herself that was all it was. One evening in mid-October, Tessa was cleaning up after supper when Dawson came back into the kitchen. He had been unusually quiet during the meal, and now he stood in the doorway as if uncertain whether to speak. "Mrs. Harper, do you have a moment?" "Of course." She dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him. "I wanted to tell you that you have done an excellent job these past 2 months. The house has never been in better order, and your cooking is far superior to anything we have had in years. Samuel says if you ever leave, he is leaving too." Tessa felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "Thank you. I am glad to be useful." "You are more than useful. You have made this place feel like a home again." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I know our original agreement said we would evaluate after 3 months, but I wanted you to know that I would be very pleased if you chose to stay on permanently. I will increase your wages to $35 a month, and we can discuss other improvements to your cabin or working conditions." "That is very generous. You have earned it. I just wanted you to know that you have a place here for as long as you want it." After he left, Tessa stood in the quiet kitchen, emotions churning in her chest. She had a place here. The words should have brought only relief and gratitude, but instead they stirred something more complicated, something that made her heart beat faster and her thoughts tangle. She was falling for Dawson Vale. The realization hit her like a physical blow, undeniable and terrifying. Somewhere between the early morning breakfasts and the Friday afternoon accounting sessions, between watching him work in the corrals and hearing his rare laugh at the dinner table, she had stopped seeing him as just her employer and started seeing him as a man. A good man, a kind man, a man who had also lost everything and was trying to build something new from the ruins. But what did it matter? He had made it clear he had no interest in marrying again. He had hired her as his housekeeper, not courted her as a potential wife. Any feelings she had were her own foolish problem, something to be managed and controlled like any other inconvenient fact of life. She resolved to be more careful, to maintain proper distance, to remember her place. She was the hired help, nothing more, and she needed to accept that and be grateful for what she had. But distance proved difficult to maintain in the close quarters of the ranch. There were the mornings when Dawson came in from feeding the stock while she was making breakfast, his hair damp from washing at the pump, smelling of soap and fresh air. There were the evenings when he sat by the fire reading while she mended clothes, the silence between them comfortable and companionable. There were the moments when their hands accidentally brushed as she passed him a plate, or he helped her carry wood, brief contacts that seemed to burn with more meaning than they should. If Dawson noticed any change in her demeanor, he gave no sign. He remained unfailingly courteous and respectful, treating her exactly as he always had. Tessa told herself that was for the best, even as part of her yearned for something more. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that transformed the ranch into something magical and strange. Tessa woke to find her cabin surrounded by white, the world muffled and quiet. She dressed quickly and hurried to the main house to start breakfast, her boots crunching through the fresh snow. Dawson was already up, stoking the fire in the main room. He looked up when she came in, snowflakes still clinging to her dark hair, and something flickered in his eyes before he looked away. "First snow," he said unnecessarily. "It is beautiful. It is early. We are in for a hard winter if it is coming on this soon." They worked together to prepare the house for winter over the following weeks. Dawson and Samuel banked the foundations with straw and manure for insulation, repaired any loose chinking in the log walls, and made sure the wood piles were fully stocked. Tessa helped preserve the last of the garden vegetables, made sure the pantry was well supplied, and sewed heavier curtains for the windows. They settled into the slower rhythm of winter. With the cattle down from the high country and most of the outdoor work limited by weather, the days grew quieter. Dawson spent more time working on repairs and maintenance, while Tessa had time to take on projects she had been putting off, like making new quilts and reorganizing the kitchen. It was during these long winter days that Tessa came to know Dawson better. They talked more, sharing stories about their lives before loss changed everything. She learned that he had grown up in Missouri, that his father had moved them to Wyoming when Dawson was 15, chasing the dream of free land and open spaces. She learned that he loved to read, that his favorite books were the adventure novels of Jules Verne and James Fenimore Cooper, that he had a secret fondness for poetry, though he would never admit it to the other ranchers. She shared her own story, too, growing up in Pennsylvania, the youngest of 5 children. Her family had not approved of her marrying William and moving west, had written her off as reckless and foolish. When William died, she had written to them asking for help, and they had sent back a cold letter saying they had warned her about the consequences of her choices. It was that rejection as much as the loss of the ranch that had left her so desperate and alone. "That is cruel," Dawson said when she finished the story. They were sitting by the fire one evening in late November, Tessa mending one of his shirts while he oiled a saddle. Family should stand by each other, especially in hard times. They were never very loving. "I think that is why I was so eager to marry William and leave. He offered me something I had never had before." "What was that?" "Someone who truly saw me, who valued me for myself rather than what I could do for them." Dawson was quiet for a long moment, his hand stilling on the leather. "That is a rare thing. You were lucky to have it, even briefly." "Were you and Mary like that? We were friends first. Grew up together in Missouri. It seemed natural to marry when we were old enough, and we were happy. But I am not sure we truly saw each other the way you are describing. We were comfortable together, but there was not that deep understanding. Do you regret marrying her?" "No, but I wish I had known better how to love her while I had the chance." The honesty of his words made Tessa's throat tighten. She wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but she kept her hands busy with her mending and her eyes on her work. December brought heavier snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days at a time. Samuel moved into the bunkhouse rather than trying to reach his cabin through the drifts, and Jake stopped coming out from town except on the clearest days. It was just the 3 of them, isolated in their small world of snow and firelight. Christmas approached, and Tessa found herself wanting to do something special. She had saved a little money from her wages and used it to buy small gifts when Dawson made a supply run to town. A new pipe for Samuel, who had broken his old one. A book for Dawson. A new novel by Mark Twain she had seen him eyeing in the general store. She baked cookies and a spice cake, made a special dinner of roast goose that Dawson had shot, and decorated the main house with pine boughs and ribbon. On Christmas morning, she invited both men to open their gifts in the main room, the fire crackling cheerfully and snow falling softly outside the windows. Samuel was delighted with his pipe, exclaiming over the quality of the carving. Dawson held the book in his hands as if it were something precious, his expression unreadable. "You did not have to do this," he said quietly. "I wanted to. You both have been so kind to me. I wanted to show my appreciation. Still, this must have cost you most of your wages this month." It was worth it. Dawson disappeared into his room and returned with a small wrapped package that he handed to Tessa. "I have something for you too." Inside was a beautiful shawl, soft wool in a deep blue that reminded her of twilight. It must have cost far more than was appropriate for an employer to spend on his housekeeper, but when she looked up at Dawson, the expression on his face stopped any protest. "I saw it in town and thought of you," he said simply. "I hoped you would like it. It is beautiful, thank you." She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, and the warmth of it felt like an embrace. They spent the rest of the day in comfortable companionship, eating too much food and telling stories by the fire. It was the best Christmas Tessa had had in years, maybe ever, and when she returned to her cabin that night, she lay awake for a long time thinking about the look in Dawson's eyes when he had given her the shawl. The new year came quietly, marked only by a toast at dinner and the continued rhythm of ranch life. January was brutally cold, with temperatures that sometimes dropped below zero at night. Tessa worried about Dawson and Samuel working outside in such conditions, insisted they come in frequently to warm up, and kept hot coffee and soup ready at all times. One particularly bitter day, Dawson came back to the house earlier than usual, his face pale and his movements stiff. Tessa took one look at him and pulled him close to the fire. "You have been out too long. You are half frozen. The stock need tending regardless of the weather. Samuel can finish. You need to warm up before you give yourself frostbite." She helped him out of his frozen coat and gloves, alarmed at how cold his hands were. Without thinking, she took them in her own, rubbing warmth back into the stiff fingers. It was only when his hands began to warm and his fingers curled slightly around hers that she realized the intimacy of the gesture. She looked up to find Dawson watching her, his blue eyes intense and searching. For a long moment neither of them moved, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Then Tessa stepped back, releasing his hands, her heart hammering. "I will make you some hot coffee," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Tessa." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his low voice made her freeze. "I need to tell you something," he continued. "I have been trying not to say anything, trying to respect our working arrangement and your position here. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." "Please do not," Tessa whispered, though whether she was asking him to stop or to continue, she could not have said. "I care for you. More than I should, more than is probably wise. You have brought life back to this house, back to me. I wake up looking forward to seeing you at breakfast. I find excuses to come inside during the day just to hear your voice. When I gave you that shawl at Christmas, I wanted to tell you then, but I was afraid. I am still afraid if I am being honest, but I cannot keep silent anymore." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. "I am your housekeeper. This is not appropriate." "I do not care about appropriate. I care about you, and I hope that maybe you care for me too." "Of course I care for you." The admission tore from her throat. But that does not mean we can act on it. You are my employer. I depend on you for my livelihood. If I were to enter into any kind of romantic entanglement with you, what would people say? That I seduced you to secure my position, that I am taking advantage of your loneliness. I do not give a damn what people say. But I do. My reputation is all I have. If I lose that, I have nothing. Dawson took a step toward her, his expression earnest. Then I will fire you. Right now. I will pay you 6 months' wages in advance, enough to get you established somewhere else if you want to leave. And then, as a free woman with no obligation to me whatsoever, I will court you properly. I will call on you at your cabin, ask your permission to take you to church socials, bring you flowers like a lovesick schoolboy. I will do whatever it takes to prove to you and everyone else that my intentions are honorable. That is insane. You cannot just fire me to court me. Why not? You just said the problem is that I am your employer, so I will remove that obstacle. Despite everything, Tessa felt a laugh bubble up. You are serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. I am tired of being alone, Tessa. I am tired of living half a life. When Mary died, I thought I would never want to love anyone again. The pain was too much. But you have shown me that there can be life after loss, that it is possible to start over. I do not want to waste this chance. Tessa looked at him standing there, his hair still damp from melted snow, his eyes blazing with determination and hope and fear all mixed together. She thought about the past 4 months, the slow building of trust and companionship, the way her heart had opened despite all her attempts to keep it closed. She thought about William, about the love they had shared, and she knew with absolute certainty that he would want her to be happy, would want her to grab onto life with both hands rather than hiding away in grief and fear. You do not have to fire me, she said softly. Then what do I have to do? Ask me. Understanding dawned in Dawson's eyes. He took both her hands in his, no longer cold but warm and strong. Tessa Harper, would you allow me to court you? Not as your employer, but as a man who admires you, respects you, and is falling in love with you despite his best efforts to remain sensible, falling in love. Her voice was barely a whisper. Fallen. Already there and just too stubborn to admit it. Take your pick. The tears she had been holding back spilled over. Yes, you can court me. Dawson pulled her into his arms and Tessa went willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her face against his chest. She could hear his heart beating fast, feel the warmth of him seeping into her. It felt like coming home, like finding something she had not even known she was looking for. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the warm kitchen while the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the stove. When they finally pulled apart, Dawson cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness that her breath caught. I am going to do this right, he promised. I am going to court you properly, take my time, let things develop naturally. I will not rush you or pressure you. We will figure this out together. What about the others? Samuel and Jake, what will they think? Samuel has been waiting for this to happen since the day I brought you home. I imagine he will be insufferably smug about it. As for Jake, he is a romantic at heart. He will approve. And anyone else who has an opinion can keep it to themselves. Over the following weeks, true to his word, Dawson courted Tessa with old-fashioned determination. He asked her permission before he visited her cabin in the evenings, brought her wildflowers even though they had to ride into town to find them at the general store's greenhouse, and treated her with a mixture of respect and affection that made her feel cherished. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests and debating different viewpoints. They found they both loved books and music, though Tessa's taste ran to romantic poetry while Dawson preferred historical accounts. They both valued hard work and honesty. Both believed in treating people fairly regardless of their station in life. Samuel watched their growing relationship with approval and occasional teasing. "About time you two figured out what was obvious to everyone else," he said one evening at supper. "We were being sensible," Dawson protested. "Sensible is overrated. You have been moping around here like a kicked puppy for months, boss. Good to see you happy again." As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Tessa found herself happier than she had been in years. The grief over William would always be part of her, but it no longer consumed her every waking moment. She had learned that the heart was larger than she had thought, capable of holding both sorrow for what was lost and hope for what might be. One evening in late March, Dawson invited her to walk with him after supper. They bundled up against the lingering cold and walked out to a ridge overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the land stretched out before them in every direction. "I wanted to show you something," Dawson said. He pointed to a spot on a gentle rise about a quarter-mile from the main house. "That is where I always thought I would build a new house, a bigger one for a family. Mary and I used to walk out here and plan it. After she died, I could not bear to look at this spot. And now I find myself thinking about it again, thinking about what it would be like to build that house, to fill it with the sounds of life and laughter." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I am asking you too soon, I know that. We have only been courting for a few months. But I am not getting any younger, and I do not want to waste time on false modesty or playing games. I love you, Tessa. I love your strength and your kindness, your quick mind and your generous heart. I love the way you have made my house a home, the way you have brought color back into my gray world. I want to build that house on the ridge, and I want to build it with you." Tessa's heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am. I know it is fast, and I know you might need more time. I am willing to wait if that is what you need. But I wanted you to know where my heart stands, what my intentions are. I want to marry you, Tessa Harper. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building a home and a family and a future together." She thought about William, about the love they had shared. She thought about the terrifying day she had packed her last belongings and prepared to leave Cody with no idea what the future held. She thought about Dawson walking into the boarding house and offering her a chance, a lifeline when she needed it most. "Yes," she said, the word coming out strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you." Dawson's face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around until they were both laughing. Then he set her down carefully and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Cody, with half the town in attendance. Tessa wore a new dress of soft gray silk, appropriate for a widow remarrying. But Dawson insisted she carry wildflowers, and Clara wove more flowers into her hair. She looked in the mirror before the ceremony and barely recognized herself. This woman with bright eyes and flushed cheeks who was glowing with happiness. Samuel stood up as Dawson's best man, and Clara served as Tessa's attendant. The ceremony was simple and beautiful, and when the reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Tessa felt as if her heart might burst with the fullness of it all. They held a reception at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. The weather cooperated with warm sunshine and gentle breezes, and there was music and dancing and laughter. Jake played the fiddle while his young son Tommy called the dances, and Tessa danced with her new husband until her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. As the sun began to set and the guests started heading home, Dawson pulled Tessa aside. "Ready to see your wedding present? You got me a wedding present beyond the ring. Come see." He led her to the rise where he had proposed, and Tessa gasped. Work had already begun on the new house. The foundation was laid, and the framing for the first floor was up. It was going to be beautiful, much larger than the current house with big windows to catch the light. "I wanted to surprise you," Dawson said. "Samuel and Jake and I have been working on it in the mornings before you woke up. It will not be ready for months yet, but I wanted you to see it today to know that I am building our future." Tessa turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. You have not even seen inside yet. I do not need to. It will be perfect because it is ours." They moved into the new house in late October, just before the first snows came. It had taken longer than expected because Dawson kept adding things, little touches that he thought would make Tessa happy. A window seat in the main room where she could sit and read. A spacious pantry with shelves enough for all her preserves and supplies. A real bathing room with a copper tub, a luxury almost unheard of on a ranch. Their first night in the new house, they lay in bed in the room they had designed together, looking out the window at the stars scattered across the black Wyoming sky. "Are you happy?" Dawson asked, his arm around her, her head resting on his chest. "I am more than happy. I am home. I kept thinking I would feel guilty being this happy after losing Mary, but I do not. I think she would be glad that I found love again. I know William would be. He always said life was too short to waste on sorrow." Dawson pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Smart man." The seasons turned and life on the ranch continued its rhythms. Tessa thrived in her new role as Dawson's wife and partner. She helped him make decisions about the ranch, managed the household accounts, and planned for the future they were building together. In the spring of 1879, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She had seen too many women die in childbirth, including Dawson's first wife. But Dawson was thrilled, already making plans to expand the house further and talking about the children they would raise together. "What if something happens?" Tessa asked one night, voicing her deepest fear. "Then we will face it together. But I have faith that you and the baby will be fine." "You are strong, Tessa, stronger than anyone I know." She drew strength from his confidence and from Clara, who had 3 healthy children of her own and promised to be with her through the birth. As her belly grew through the summer and into fall, Tessa found herself dreaming about the future, about the child who would run through their house and learn to ride horses in the corrals and grow up surrounded by love. Their son was born on a cold December night, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Tessa was certain she would not survive it. But Clara was there, coaching her through each contraction, and Dawson held her hand and refused to leave her side even when Clara suggested he might want to wait in another room. When the baby finally came, his first cry was the most beautiful sound Tessa had ever heard. Clara placed the squalling infant on her chest, and Tessa looked down at his tiny red face in wonder. "A son," Clara announced. "A healthy, perfect son." Dawson was crying unabashedly, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. Thank you." They named him Daniel William, honoring both their fathers. Danny was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching Dawson with him melted Tessa's heart. He was such a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to her for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft lullabies in his deep voice. "I never thought I would have this," he said one night, holding Danny while Tessa rested. "After Mary and the baby died, I thought children were not meant for me. But here he is, this perfect little person. It feels like a miracle." "We are lucky," Tessa agreed. "So very lucky." 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Emma Rose. She had Tessa's dark hair and Dawson's blue eyes, and she was beautiful and spirited from the start. Danny adored his little sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. The house on the ridge filled with the sounds of children laughing, of family dinners and bedtime stories, of all the small moments that made up a life. Samuel retired from active ranch work, but stayed on in his cabin, serving as grandfather to the children and valued advisor to Dawson. Jake's son Tommy took over as foreman, proving himself a capable and trustworthy manager. The ranch prospered under Dawson's careful management and Tessa's shrewd financial planning. They added more land, increased their herd, and became one of the most successful operations in the region. But more than the material success, they had built something far more valuable, a true home, a place of love and laughter and belonging. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Dawson took Tessa back to the boarding house in Cody where they had first met. The building was much the same, though Mrs. Patterson had retired and new owners had taken over. "You remember standing here with your trunk, looking so fierce and proud?" Dawson asked. "I remember thinking I had nothing left to lose. I was terrified but trying not to show it. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met. You had lost everything, but you were not broken. You were ready to start over, to fight for a new life. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, though I did not know it at the time. And I remember thinking you were either crazy or the kindest man alive, offering work to a desperate stranger." "Maybe both," Tessa laughed. "Definitely both. But I am grateful every day that you walked into that boarding house. You saved me, Dawson." "No, you saved yourself. I just gave you an opportunity. Everything else you did on your own." They walked through town hand in hand, visiting the general store and the church, seeing friends and neighbors. Everyone remarked on how happy they looked, what a handsome couple they made. And they were happy. Deeply and genuinely happy in a way that had seemed impossible when Tessa was packing those last belongings so many years ago. As the years passed, they added a 3rd child, another son they named Samuel after the old ranch hand who had become such an important part of their family. Samuel Sr. lived to see his namesake born, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. His loss was deeply felt, but his memory lived on in the stories they told and the values he had embodied. Danny grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch and showed every sign of being a capable successor to his father. Emma was spirited and independent, learning to ride as soon as she could walk and declaring her intention to be a rancher like her father. Young Samuel was thoughtful and gentle, with a gift for working with animals that reminded Tessa of Dawson. On a warm summer evening when they had been married for 12 years, Tessa and Dawson sat on the porch of their house on the ridge, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. The children were playing in the yard, their shouts and laughter carrying on the breeze. From the barn came the sounds of the horses settling for the night, and in the distance, the cattle grazed peacefully. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Tessa asked. "If you had not come to the boarding house that day, or if I had already left for Cheyenne?" "I try not to think about it. The idea of missing you, of never knowing what we could have together, is too terrible to contemplate. I was so scared that day. I thought my life was over, that I would spend the rest of my days alone and struggling. I never imagined I could be this happy again." Dawson took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I told you once that you showed me it was possible to have life after loss. That is still true, but it is more than that now. You did not just help me survive, you taught me how to truly live again. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to look forward to each new day. You gave me the same. That day you told me to unpack my belongings at your place. You gave me more than just work. You gave me hope. Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Young Samuel came running up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Papa, Mama, come see." Danny caught a fish in the creek, a really big one. Dawson stood, pulling Tessa up with him. "We had better go see this remarkable fish." They walked down to the creek together, Tessa's hand in Dawson's, joining their children in their excitement over the day's adventure. This was their life now, filled with simple joys and shared love, built on the foundation of two people who had lost everything and found each other in the process. Years later, when Tessa was old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren, she would tell them the story of how she met their grandfather. She would describe packing her last belongings in that boarding house room, feeling as if her life was ending. She would tell them about the tall cowboy with blue eyes who had offered her not charity but a chance. And she would tell them about unloading those same belongings at his ranch, not knowing that she was unpacking not just her possessions but her future, her happiness, and the beginning of the greatest love she had ever known. But on this summer evening, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, with her husband's hand warm in hers and her children's laughter in her ears, Tessa did not think about the past or even the future. She simply lived in the perfect present, in this moment of complete and utter contentment, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the people she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The house on the ridge stood solid and welcoming, lights glowing in the windows as the stars came out one by one. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying with it the scent of home and happiness. In the barn, the horses nickered softly to each other. In the pastures, the cattle settled for the night. And on the porch, two people who had been lost and alone had found each other and built something beautiful from the ruins of their old lives. This was their legacy, this home and family and enduring love. This was what they would pass down to their children and their children's children. The knowledge that life could surprise you, that second chances were possible, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil if you were brave enough to plant the seeds and patient enough to tend them. And it all began on that fateful day when a widow was packing her last belongings, and a cowboy said the words that would change both their lives forever. "Unpack them at my place." The wild Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the stories of all who had come before, all who had struggled and survived, all who had loved and lost, and somehow found the courage to love again. And under the vast western sky, in a house built on hope and sustained by devotion, Tessa and Dawson Vale lived out their days in happiness, grateful for every moment, cherishing every memory, and knowing that their love story, born from loss and blossoming into joy, was the greatest gift they could ever receive.